The Honest Money podcast is brought to you by Prescient Investment Management. We consider everything to give you the advantage. It's the future of investing. Prescient Investment Management is an authorized FSP.
Welcome to Honest Money. I'm Warren Ingram.
It's Pieter Villiers from Money Marks.
Today we're talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is how to calculate your financial freedom number. And I think it's, that's what we're all working towards, is get to the point where we're making decisions because they're good for us, because they're things we want to do, not because we have to earn a salary working for the man, paying the bills and living a life that's not one we choose to live. And so financial freedom is, it's not a kind of, how to get rich quick or whatever. It's about getting to the point where you're making very positive, very constructive choices. And that's great. It's such a nice concept. But eventually we're going to have to figure out, have we got a number? Have we got enough? How do we get there? Are we making progress? And that's what today is about, is to figure out the number, and then how to figure out if you're actually getting to the goal, or maybe you're going backwards.
Yeah, I think the traditional notion of retirement is probably, in my mind, based on the conversation I have with younger people, it's kind of falling away. It's more so reaching financial freedom. So what does that mean? It essentially means you've built up enough assets to get to the point where work becomes optional, where you can continue working and earn a salary, but you don't have to, because you've built up enough assets that you can draw an income from to sustain your lifestyle. And the good thing about this is you don't necessarily need millions or hundreds of millions, let's say rather that, because that's oftentimes what people think. You only need enough to sustain your lifestyle. That's why it's very personal. So you need to first see what is your desired lifestyle that you want to live based off what you know and understand of today. And then we have a formula that we can calculate and say, okay, based off that, this is the number you need to aim for. And it's a rule of thumb. So it has its limitations, of course, and it's not a perfect science, but it gives you at least a sense of direction as to, okay, sure, this is what I'm aiming for, and this is where I am. Right, so now I can start working towards that. That's what we're going to cover. It's just, okay, so how do we calculate? What is this number that we're referring to, this financial freedom number or FIRE number that sometimes get referred to?
Yeah, and so maybe just very quickly, that financial freedom number, once you've got the number and you've got the amount of money, the thing that we're not saying, but maybe just to make it obvious, is it also assumes then that you're debt free and that you've got your emergency fund. So those are kind of the three steps. Get get debt free, get your emergency fund, and then you've got your investment money that looks after you when you no longer need to work. And so I think the way to calculate this, maybe just to start, is don't put it in the life that you think you should be living. In other words, don't say, well, if I look at my bank statements, I'm spending 20,000 Rand a month, but actually I should be spending 12,000. So I'm going to work out my financial freedom number based on 12,000 a month. That's not right. You need to look at life as it is, and then work out how do you get to your financial freedom number. And I think a lot of people make that mistake, is that, if they develop a savings plan, they say, well, I should only be spending 30, but currently I'm spending 45. The reality is you're spending 45. Deal with it and then take action. It's the same with your financial freedom number. So, just to start, I think you take what you spend on a monthly basis, and that, for example, will include all of your regular monthly expenses. You are going to live, which means you are going to need a place to live. You are going to need to cover the insurance costs of where you stay. You're going to need food, all of those things. So take the costs as they are in your life today. The only things that I would obviously exclude would be, for example, if you're paying for your children's education and something that absolutely will end. For example, you might be looking after a grandparent and they might be in their 80s. Unfortunately, I hope it's not a surprise to you, but unfortunately, they're not going to live forever, and so there will be a time when that cost will fall away. So you take those costs and you times it by 12. Why are you doing that? So that you can get to an annual number, and that's the starting point. It's not the only thing, of course. That's the world of money. It's never absolutely simple. You also need to take into account costs that might not happen every year, but they are going to happen throughout your life. So, for example, if your monthly costs don't include an annual holiday, then you've got to add an annual holiday expense. If you replace your cars every 5 years or 8 years or 10 years, it doesn't matter what the period is, but take that expense. Let's just say it's 10 years and you spend R1 million a year, R1 million every 10 years on cars. Take $1 million divided by 10. That's your annual expense for a car. So it's all those infrequent, irregular expenses. If you own a house, you might need to repaint it or do the roof or something. Put that expense in there. So it's everything that costs you to live in a year, and that's your annual cost.
Yes.
And then
you take that number and you divide it by 4% or 0.04, and then you get to your financial freedom number. So if you, for example, spend 30,000 Rand a month, and that's over a year, 360,000 Rand. Let's say that includes all the kind of ad hoc lump sum, and you divide that by 4%. This equates to about 9 million Rand. So that in that case, if 30,000 is your monthly expenses that you will need, 9 million would be your number. Now, there's two elements also to this, because I oftentimes when I have this conversation with people, they say, "Yeah, I think I spent 30,000. Yeah, that sounds right." No thinking. You have to go and look at your actual expenses. So it's important that you actually go and track your expenses. Go through this log of pulling the bank statements, writing down the expenses. And, it's usually good to put everything on paper or an Excel sheet, and then kind of black out the expenses that you're probably not going to need. Like Warren mentioned, kids' education or taking care of an elderly family member, because then you can have a more realistic number. And, if you're just going to do that for 1 month, probably not going to be accurate. So 3 months is probably more advisable, because then you kind of fizzle out the once-off stuff. And then the ad hoc expenses, the cars and the holidays, yes, make a good informed guesstimate of what that might be. You never know if your house is going to fall over or if the roof is going to collapse. There's no way you can really think about that, but you can say, okay, I probably have to spend money on renovating my house, and this is what I think. So adding that is important, and being realistic to your situation, because you might think you need this amount, but then when you look what you're actually spending, it might be more. And you can also say, probably if you do this calculation, you're going to get a fright. That's normal. But then you can also say, okay, well, geez, if I need this amount staring at me, it's going to take me many years, many decades. But if you are able to say, okay, well, I'd be happy with a more simpler life. I may not need this overseas holiday every year. Then you can adjust that and then adjust the number, because it's all about what is, again, the lifestyle that you want to live. Now, this 4% rule is quite a popular one that has been kind of introduced many years ago by the American market. And again, we can go into the technical side as to what that means. But essentially what that entails is, if you retire or you reach financial freedom, and you have this pot of money that you now have invested, you can safely draw down 4% of that amount for 30 years. That's kind of the general rule of thumb. Now, again, the markets could be different. It could be in a different cycle. But now that's 30 years. So, for example, if you have 65 in mind, that's your financial freedom number, you'll be okay until 95. But now if you want to retire early at 45, probably going to have to adjust that 4% slightly and make it a little bit less, because you're going to have to provide for more.
Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing about money, is there isn't going to be an exact agreement all the time. So for me, I'll take the risk. I'll stop at 55 and go with the 4%. From the point of view that you're right, you can make adjustments. I mean, I think if you're at financial freedom at age 55 and you're drawing 4% from your investments, I think the one important thing there is, we're not saying to you that you take that money and you put it in a bank account and you earn 4%, or you're earning, let's say, 8% a year of interest and you're drawing 4%. That's not going to help you at all. You want to kind of invest that in a very typical balanced portfolio. So you choose a balanced unit trust as a very good example, or a combination of investments that give you that exposure to the stock market, the property companies, the bond market, and cash. But if you look at what balanced funds have done for the last 10, 20, 30 years, they generally give you around about 10 or 11% growth over that time. Not per year. It's not like a fixed deposit where it's guaranteed. But if you said over a typical 10 or 20 year period, what am I going to generate as growth from that? It's going to be about 10 or 11% a year. If you're drawing 4%, I'm going to use 10% as the example so I can keep my math simple. But if you're drawing 4% a year and you're averaging 10% a year growth, that means you're leaving behind 6%. And if cost of living is growing at 6% a year, I mean, there is a good argument to say that you could actually let that money, or that money could last in real terms, in buying power terms, for 40, 50, 60 years. However, if you do get to a major stock market crash and things have really got tough, you might need to make the call then to say, actually, I can't draw 4% this year. I've got to be careful. I've got to draw less. Or if you go through a purple patch where markets are going up really strongly and they're delivering 15 or 20% growth for a couple of years, which is very nice, then don't draw 4%, draw a bit less. So you can be a little bit flexible there, but I like this calculation. And so, I mean, if you listen to Pieter's view, I think what's important about that, you're not going to be surprised on the other side. You're not going to outlive your money. On my scenario, you might outlive your money if you're not careful, but maybe not. So I think that having that flexibility into the plan is important. And as you say, I mean, if you want to get to financial freedom early and as early as possible, then the thing that you can control, because you can't control markets and all of those things, you can control your expenses. And so if you keep your cost base very low and you do that, I mean, dividing by 4% is the same as multiplying it by 25. So 25 times your expenses, it's a huge number. So if you can cut your annual expenses by 100,000, 25 times 100,000, it's a huge difference. So that's the point here. That's what you're saying is keep your lifestyle costs low, and you can get to financial freedom relatively quickly, relatively simply. But if your lifestyle costs are high, then you're going to be doing this for decades and decades and decades, and maybe never getting there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that. So why we get to 4% is it has to be 4% after inflation, after fees, and preferably after taxes as well. So yes, if we want to aim for our money to grow for at least 30, 40, 50 years, no point in having it in a 6% bank account where you're probably paying 1 or 2% taxes already on interest tax, but then there's also inflation of 5 to 6%, and maybe you've got it invested somewhere, and there's those platform fees, advisor fees, all of those things need to be taken into account. So that is why it's important to still be conscious of how the money is invested and what are you paying, and all of those factors need to be taken into account. So it's not just you get to that number and now it's all good, fun stuff. It's still very much a work in progress. And yes, again, there's flexibility around it. It's not necessarily that you just work hard until you get to that number and now that's it. You just sit on the stoop every day. It can be that the market is down and you can pick up some sort of job and you can still earn an income. So it might not mean you stop working completely and doing nothing for 30 years. You might still be able to at least have the option to say, listen, I'm not happy in my career or in my current job. I can leave. I can tell my boss, fine, I'm leaving. And you can maybe even scale back a bit and say, I'm not working 50 hours a week, so I'm working 10 hours a week. Now you're still earning an income, still have expenses, but now that gap is less. So your number also becomes smaller. So it's a nice way to quickly get to something, but it's not perfect science. You still have flexibility around what that might mean for you. But I also know with the FIRE movement, so financial independence, retire early, is a relatively new thing where people want to get to that number as soon as possible. Young people, they let me live as frugal as possible now so that I can invest as much of my income as possible. Now I'm talking about upwards of 50%, 50, 60, 70% of income that they invest so that they can kind of accelerate that wealth building process to get to that number, and then they can stop working. I think it's nice in theory, and I've been part of that process, to be honest. I also thought I will do that. But then also remember that you don't necessarily want to sacrifice quality of life when you're still young just to get to some arbitrary number to say, I don't have to work anymore. I think it's more than that. You have to really think what is important to you in life, and it's having a fine balance, because I think you get people on the both extreme ends. You get people that's oblivious to the fact that they need to save anything, and they're just YOLO, living in the moment. Tomorrow will take care of itself. And then you get people who's extreme frugalist, where they don't spend anything now for that one day at 40, 45 that they can finally stop working. but then they also missed out on important periods in their lives. Maybe simple things like going out with friends for dinners, starting a family, living in a nice area. So it's a balance, but it helps you to understand and conceptualize what it is that you actually need to sustain your current lifestyle.
So you've heard it here first on Honest Money. Pieter is a recovering fire movement person.
Yes.
And I agree with that 100%. Life is about balance. And I mean, my favorite quote around balance is Warren Buffett, and he was being given a hard time because he drinks Coke and has McDonald's burgers every now and then. And people were giving him a hard time at one of the annual general meetings, and he was in his late 80s already. And he said, there's no chance that I would have made it to this age if I only drank water and ate broccoli, because I would have died of unhappiness. And so, you've got to blend everything in life and do what's right for you. So I think just, when we at the start of this show, you said it's going to seem like a big number, and that's true. So it's not. When you do the calculation and you realize, let's just say you do the calculation and you've got 2 million rands worth of investments, and your financial freedom number is 20 million rand. Don't get depressed that you've got an 18 million rand gap if you're only 29 years old. I mean, what you need to do now is say, okay, what's the plan for the next year to make sure that I'm reducing the gap? So in 12 months from the time you do it, and I think it's a good idea to do it, just choose a month, So if it's January every year, that's fine. It doesn't matter. June every year, do the calculation, look at your expenses, and then work out your financial freedom number, the updated one, because your expenses would have changed, and then take your investment assets. What you're aiming for is to close that gap every year. So this year, you had 2 million rands worth of investments, and your financial freedom number was 20. Next year, you hope that your financial freedom number might be 21, but you've now got 3 million rands worth. Oh no, that wouldn't have changed anything. Your financial freedom number, you hope, is 21, and you've got 4 million rands worth of investments. So what you want to do is close the gap every year. If you're consistently closing that gap faster and at an accelerating rate, what it means is there will be a time when the gap might be very small. So it's just making progress. And every year, what you want to do is celebrate the progress, closing the gap, not saying, oh my goodness, now I've, the gap's gone from 18 to 16, it's still 16. The reality is you've accelerated your way of getting to closing the gap. And I think that's what you want to do is human beings, we can't just give ourselves an end goal. What we've got to do is give ourselves a series of small goals, whether it's monthly or annually, and then celebrate those. You don't want to feel like you're making no progress. And I think that's maybe where this kind of a conversation falls down, as people go, the number is so big, and then they switch off the podcast, shut their laptop if they were watching us on YouTube, and then they never think about it again because they think it's hopeless. That's not true. It takes a long time to build up your first million. It's a heck of a lot quicker to build up your second million, and so on and so on and so on. So you can close that gap. I think the trick, and that's what you were saying about controlling your expenses, is what you want to do is make sure that you don't accelerate the way you spend. So you want to accelerate the way you accumulate capital and then control your expenses. So if you can do that, you might be saving at an accelerating rate, building up capital at an accelerating rate, but the goal is not getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But if your salary's accelerating and the way you spend is accelerating as well, that's a choice you've made. But what you need to know is you're pushing out your financial freedom date by a long way.
Yeah, you're chasing a moving target and keeping up with the Joneses and the Kumalas. You have to be careful of lifestyle creep, because as your salary increases, your lifestyle expectations increases. And I always use this analogy of, when you're young and you at uni you stay in this small student apartment and you're happy, you eat. And I ate like 2-minute noodles. I survived for 6 years. It was fine. And now you start working and like, okay, now I'm not going to stay in a student apartment. I'm going to now get a bachelor's flat. Nice. All right, so now I'm in the bachelor's flat, but now I don't have anything. I need to now buy a couch and a bed and a fridge. Okay, you buy that. You look at the place, you're like, oh, but it still seems empty. I need something there in the corner and stuff there. And you buy that, and now suddenly it starts feeling cramped. It's too much stuff. Like, okay, now I need a bigger place. Now I need a townhouse. Now you go and rent or buy a townhouse, and now again you move everything, and you feel like, oh, but now it looks empty again. I need something in that corner and over there. You buy it, now it starts feeling cramped again, and then that cycle repeats itself. So be careful of that. And I think this is a great way to keep yourself accountable and also aware that if your lifestyle expenses increases, your target is also moving. And I love this idea of keeping track of that every year, because not only will you keep yourself accountable to tracking your own expenses and seeing what that is, which I think is always first step of any financial plan, is knowing what you spend, but it also helps you stay motivated to see that, okay, I have made progress. And, running a marathon, you're not just going to pitch up with your tackies and start running. You have to train for that. You have to start at the 1K and the 5K and the 10K and build up to it. Then celebrate the small wins, to know that this year we have made progress, and enjoy the journey, and don't just get fixated on an arbitrary number on the destination, but know that you are building towards something, but you also have to keep yourself in check and be cautious of not continuing to spend as you earn more, because that's a trap.
Yeah, and I think enjoy the ride. I mean, I think that that's the lesson we should learn from this. Is once you've got balance, it means you're getting day-to-day enjoyment and making progress. And I think we don't need to get to financial freedom and then say, okay, now I feel like I'm in control. Once you've made significant progress, you might not be able to stop work entirely, but you might be able to change jobs with a bit of freedom and not work in the job you absolutely hate. And the more you get some kind of control over your finances, the more other aspects of life kind of fall into line. And it's amazing to me watching people over their careers, those that start to make progress towards financial freedom actually do better in their careers, because they're a bit more relaxed, they're a bit more focused on, is this really what I want to do? And then they are better at the job, because once you enjoy something, it's funny, you just get better at it. And people respond to you better. So there is a virtuous cycle here, and I agree with you. I'm not a big fan of the FIRE movement. I think there are very few people that suit that life, and I don't think they're all that fun when they're sitting on the top of some lonely mountain eating their 2-minute noodles for the next 30 years. So I think it's something you should work towards. It should be a positive and fun experience. Don't forget to share it with friends and family who share the same interests with you. You don't have to tell them all your numbers, but it's kind of create a community around it is a very nice thing to do as well. I think we're out of time.
Yes, thank you. This was quite a fun conversation, and I think something that we'll expand upon in future episodes as well. And yeah, I always love just having something to work towards and seeing yourself making progress and understanding how did we get to that number and how can we continuously build to reaching that goal. And that just encapsulates everything about personal finances. It's a journey, and it's a ever-evolving journey of learning and experiencing and building skills and knowledge. And that is why you are here. That's why you're listening and watching. And thank you for your attention today, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you to Sealand for kitting us out. We appreciate it. And don't forget to subscribe, and we'll catch you at the next episode. Bye.
Bye-bye.
The Honest Money podcast is brought to you by Prescient Investment Management. We consider everything to give you the advantage. It's the future of investing. Prescient Investment Management is an authorized FSP.